common misconception among spiritual seekers that once the spiritual journey begins, life challenges will simply disappear. So it often comes as a surprise when we find ourselves facing hardships again. But life is full of ups and downs, isn't it? So the real question here is how to remain steady amid them. And that's exactly what we're going to explore in this episode, guided by Simon Haas, who is an internationally renowned author and a yoga philosophy teacher who specializes in applying ancient wisdom to everyday life. So, welcome everybody once again to a new episode of Ashram Talks. Welcome, Simon. I'm so happy to have you here, and I'm really excited about this episode. I think it's a fascinating topic.
Thank you so much, Subhadra. I'm so excited to be here too. Today we're still in chapter. We're moving towards the end of chapter 2, so gradually making our way through chapter 2, and we'll be looking at verses 55 to 61. So this particular episode is entitled "The Secret of Staying Steady and Good in Good Times and Bad." So, as usual, as is a long tradition in India when reading or studying the Bhagavad Gita, we begin with a Mangalacharanam or an auspicious invocation that opens up a circle of wisdom. He Shri Guru Jnana Dadina Bandho Svananda Data Karunaika Sindho Brindavanasi Nahitavatara Prasidha Radha Pranaya Prachara Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So, a little bit of context before we move into a set of verses in chapter 2. So, as you know, the warrior Arjuna, he falls into an existential crisis on the battlefield, a dark night of the soul, right between two great armies at the onset of war. And Krishna begins, so he turns to Krishna, his charioteer and best friend, and asks him for help in his crisis. And Krishna begins by sharing the teachings of Sankhya and Vedanta on the nature of the unchanging self. So we've had quite a few episodes on that. And these teachings come from the ancient Upanishads, Vedic texts known as the Upanishads. And it's a way of distinguishing between the changing physical body and the mind, and the central character in our small human story, and the true self, the unchanging self. So Krishna then begins to turn to karma yoga, the yoga of skillful action. And he differentiates between acting with attachment and acting without attachment, and making what we do an offering to the divine, an offering to the soul of the universe. So even though two people may be engaged in exactly the same action, what they're doing can be worlds apart. So we see that, for example, with Duryodhana and Arjuna. Both are engaged in fighting as warriors on the field of action, so Kurukshetra, but there's a world of difference between what they're doing. So one thing I should mention is we haven't yet encountered Krishna's identity. So Krishna is the soul of the universe present in the heart of each one of us. And he'll reveal his identity later in the Gita. So I mention this, though, because in the Mahabharata, the Gita is 18 chapters within a much larger epic known as the Mahabharata. So the readers of the Mahabharata will know who Krishna is, even though Krishna hasn't mentioned anything at this stage yet in the Gita. So Krishna then explains karma yoga, and then he moves to what's known as buddhi yoga. Buddhi yoga means the yoga of the intelligence. And buddhi yoga is basically bhakti yoga, or the yoga of devotion. And Krishna will begin making that clear. It's a way of acting in this world without attachment and making what we do an offering to the divine. So in this episode, we'll look at a larger set of verses in order to understand them as a set, basically, because they um, they come together, and they very much cover the same theme. And that theme is what's known as stita pragya. Pragya means wisdom, and stita means positioned or situated. So it's how to be situated in wisdom in a way that's unchanging. So I mentioned that because as as we've discussed in previous episodes, it's very easy to be wise when things are going well in our life. There are no difficulties immediately on the horizon, and we're able to, be very calm, not be pushed around by strong emotions like anger or frustration or anxiety. But it's in times of difficulty that our yoga practice is actually really tested, and we may find things that we weren't quite aware of. So we may find that we're holding on to a lot of anger that suddenly reveals itself, or various frustrations, or we may behave in a way that even surprises ourselves. So, stita pragya, someone who is um, firmly situated or established in wisdom, their wisdom doesn't it doesn't it doesn't move away, it doesn't dissipate or disappear in times of difficulty, and they remain unmoved in the greatest, when there's so much turbulence in life, they remain unmoved. So Krishna will begin describing this, who Astita Pragya is. Arjuna was eager to understand, how does such a person live in the world? How do they speak? How do they um, how do they engage with life? And Krishna is explaining now how Astita Pragya speaks and acts and so on. So it's fascinating. So we start with verse 55 of chapter 2. So I'll read the Sanskrit for this particular verse. Now, I should say that in the episodes to come, other speakers will unpack each verse one at a time. Here we're looking at the full set of how many? I think it's about 6 verses. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Prajahati Yada Kaman Sarvan Parta Manogatan Atmanyevatmana Tushtaha Stita Pragyastadocyate. The Blessed Lord said, O Partha. Partha is another name for Arjuna. So, O Arjuna, when a person gives up all varieties of sense desire, which arise from mental concoction, and when his mind finds satisfaction in the self alone, then he is said to be in pure transcendental consciousness. So you see the word stita pragya here. Stita means steady or established, and pragya can mean intelligence, it means wisdom. And tad uchyate means that is called. So this is Krishna's explaining here the qualities of someone who is stita pragya. Now, interestingly here, yada, when, sarvan, kaman sarvan, all desires. So here, Krishna is explaining that this is a person who isn't pushed around by the various kind of desires or cravings that crop up in the mind. Now, we're very fortunate to have a long tradition of commentators going back hundreds of years on the Bhagavad Gita. And I like to rely very much on Sri Baladev Vidyabhushan, who's an incredible commentator on the Bhagavad Gita, as well as other texts. So he actually comments on the Upanishads, on the Brahma Sutra, on the Srimad Bhagavatam, and also on this text, this Vedantic text, the Bhagavad Gita. And he explains that the reason why a person's able to give up cravings and kind of worldly desires that keep coming up, how is that possible that a person can actually give that up? We're able to give that up because those desires, they don't reside in the self. So the eternal self, the unchanging self, rather these desires reside in the mind. And they emerge from the small human story that we live out. And for that reason, we're able to give them up. If they were part of the true self, the unchanging self, it would be impossible to set aside or to ignore, you can say, the various cravings and desires desires that the senses and the mind draw us towards. Those, we wouldn't be able to give them up if they were actually part of the fundamental unchanging self. But because they're not, we're able to set them aside. So one might wonder, and this is quite important, one might wonder, if we set desires aside, the various desires that come as a continuous stream, Krishna will begin explaining, why, what the problem is with these numerous desires that come up in the mind and in the heart. Because as soon as we fulfill one particular desire, another one crops up. I mean, we probably all have some experience of this. Sometimes we work really hard towards a particular goal. Once that goal is achieved, it gives us some temporary satisfaction for a little bit of time, and then immediately new desires begin growing in the heart. And we begin thinking of ways that we can reach those particular objectives in our life. And so these desires come in a continuous stream. And someone who's continually chasing these various things, they never find true fulfillment within. And the heart is always restless. And there's no true peace that a person can experience if they're continually chasing this endless chain of desires that emerge in the heart. Now, on the other hand, when a desire is not fulfilled, it's frustrated, then it leads to frustration and anger. And so then we're caught up in this net, you can say, of desire, fear, and anger. And Krishna will explain more about that in a moment. So we move now to the next verse, which is a famous verse in the Gita, verse 56. Dukeshvanudvigna manaha sukeshu vigata spriha vitaragha bhaya krodha stita dhir muniruchyate. One who is not disturbed in spite of the threefold miseries, who is not elated when there's happiness, and who is free from attachment, fear, and anger, is called a sage of steady mind. So again, you have the word stita dhi. Dhi is also means it's a synonym of pragya. It also means intellect or wisdom. So established in wisdom. So here, as I'd mentioned just a few moments ago, dukeshu, in sorrow. It means in sorrow or in misfortune. Anudvigna manaha. The mind is not disturbed. In other words, the mind is untroubled. Now, the next one is very interesting. The next line, sukeshu, in happiness or in good fortune, vigata spriha, free from desire or craving. In other words, when things are going really well, then our heart is not disturbed by so many desires and cravings. And then vitaraga bhaya krodha, free from attachment, which is raga, fear, which is bhaya, and anger, which is krodha. So someone who lives in that way and who's not pushed around by the mind and senses, they are steady in their wisdom. Moving to the next verse, 57. He who is without attachment, who does not rejoice when he obtains good, nor lament when he obtains evil, is firmly fixed in perfect knowledge. And the next verse, 58. One who is able to withdraw his senses from the sense objects, as the tortoise draws its limbs within the shell, is to be understood as truly situated in knowledge. So Baladev Vidyabhushan Prabhu, he explains that the senses are very strong and they can suppress knowledge. So in other words, when we misidentify the mind and senses as being who we truly are, and we follow whatever emerges from them or wherever they pull us, then that ends up covering our knowledge. In other words, our wisdom becomes suppressed. The natural wisdom of the soul of the self becomes suppressed. And one analogy that's often provided, so we find it in the Katha Upanishad, is a chariot with horses. So a chariot with 5 horses, and these horses are like they're wild horses. And the chariot is the physical body, and the horses are the senses. And the reins of the horse are the mind, and the driver is, well, the intelligence. So this particular chariot, when the wild horses that are pulling this chariot are uncontrolled, it pulls us in all kinds of directions in life. And we know that the mind can be our best friend and our worst enemy. Krishna will mention that in a short while. The mind can really help us, and we can achieve incredible things, really fulfill our potential in this world and in this life. The mind can also really suppress our potential and cause us to behave in ways that are just very troublesome and very damaging and harmful. So Baladev Vidyabhushan, he explains that what Krishna is explaining here, what Krishna's teaching, is that someone who practices yoga, they carefully protect their knowledge from the senses, just as a person protects a great treasure from thieves. Moving to the next verse, verse 59. Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya dehinaha rasavarjam rasopyasya param drishtva nivartate. Very important verse in the Gita, and you'll see why in a moment. The embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, though the taste for sense objects remains. But ceasing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, he is fixed in consciousness. So I remember as a young boy reading these verses for the first time. I was a little bit confused because it was a new idea for me, the idea of not having like worldly desires. A true yogi or yogini being free from not being controlled or overpowered by the continuous stream of desires. I thought that, well, aren't desires what makes life interesting? It allows us to, work hard in the world. It gives us the drive that we need, and there's kind of some satisfaction in that, isn't there? I wondered, and Krishna explains here, gives the answer to that particular question, if we have that question, that there is some temporary happiness in following the desires that we have in this world and in pursuing in pursuing the various pathways that lead to lead to comfort and a sense of enjoyment. There is some happiness to that, but it's temporary, and it's always mixed with some suffering. So, for example, if we amass capital, and we work very hard, we save money, and if we feel a sense of kind of assurance or protection from our savings, immediately there's also some degree of suffering. So we wonder whether there's going to be a market crash. We wonder whether we'll be able to hold on to those savings. Are they going to be eroded by inflation? Will some fraudulent activity, some fraudster, be able to access our account? So that there's always some level of anxiety that comes with that. And whatever we may have is also temporary. We can lose it very easily, actually. For one thing, I was reading just the other day something really I found to be, it really rang true to me, that in life we have many problems, so many kind of things, challenges that we try to overcome. But when we're ill, and I say this because I've been ill for the past week with a horrible flu, which I've just managed to kind of recover from, although I still feel a little bit weak from it. But if any of us have ever been through a kind of a debilitating illness, we know that in life we might have many challenges, many problems. As soon as our health fails, we have only one problem, which is our health. um, and so what I mean to say is that when the very instrument, the very vehicle by which we are able to express ourselves in this world, when there's a problem with that, when that collapses, then suddenly we realize that there's nothing else, there's nothing we're able to do. We're very vulnerable. So someone who's a yogi or a yogini, they don't find, and this is the key point, they don't find their identity in the things of this world. So they may engage in exactly the same activities. They will, they'll have a particular profession. They'll have savings. They may have a family if they choose to. They outwardly it will look exactly the same, but the way that they're approaching life is entirely different. If they're stita pragya, if they're situated in wisdom, situated in knowledge. And where is it that they find their happiness? They don't find their identity or their happiness in the things of this world, but rather param drishtva nivartate. They are experiencing a higher taste. The fulfillment that they find is actually within, and not derived from the things of this world, which are temporary. Moving on to the next verse, verse 60. The senses are so strong and impetuous, O Arjuna, that they forcibly carry away the mind, even of a person of discrimination who's endeavoring to control them. So Krishna's here emphasizing that the senses and the mind are very strong, and it is very difficult actually to control them. But in the next verse, he explains how this can be done. So verse 61. One who restrains his senses and fixes his consciousness upon me is known as a person of steady intelligence. So here Krishna is for the first time speaking about bhakti yoga, or the yoga of devotion. So Krishna is advising Arjuna that the best way to control the mind and senses is to fix them on something that is, to fix them on Krishna, the soul of the universe. the self of the self. And a person who's able to do that is truly someone of steady intelligence, or someone who's established in wisdom. So when Krishna uses the word Atma, so you will have noticed, I think, that in a few places he speaks about the focusing one's mind on the self. Now the word for self, Atma, has two meanings. So it means the soul, the unchanging self. It also means the supreme soul, meaning Sri Krishna. So by focusing our attention, by focusing our directing our efforts towards the supreme self, automatically we are able to develop the steady intelligence, the steady wisdom that Krishna is describing in this set of verses. So you'll have seen that Krishna has emphasized in this passage that the yogi or the yogini is someone who renounces the desire for worldly pleasure. And that's the difference between karma and karma yoga. So karma is action, karma yoga is um, the yoga of action. So skillful action. The action is the same, but the karma yogi or the karma yogini is acting without selfish desire. And we've seen how in verses 56 and 57, Krishna has further explained that such a person is undisturbed by the vicissitudes of fortune. So they're not elated when things go well. They're not downcast when difficulties or misfortunes inevitably come our way. They remain aloof of these fluctuations of fortune. And hence, they're free from passion, fear, and anger. They're the master of their own being, you can say, and not the servant of the uncontrolled senses. And in verse 59, as we saw, Krishna has said that that's made possible by the perception of something higher than this world. So param drishtva, which means seeing something higher. And also the word rasa, meaning taste. So this becomes possible when someone starts to experience the joy of true spiritual realization. And then in the final verse, verse 61, Krishna has used the word matparaha, which means dedicated to me, to describe the way in which the practitioner should perform buddhi yoga, the yoga of the intellect. So this reference that Krishna makes here is an introduction to bhakti, devotion to the Supreme Self, which Krishna will develop in later chapters. Now, we've already discussed previously the Sankhya teachings of the difference between the field of perception and the knower of the field. So the field of perception is everything that we see around us. Refers to the world that we perceive, but also our physical body, because we're able to see it. Whatever we can see in the field of perception is not who we are. And when we confuse the knower of the field and the field of perception, it draws us into suffering. So Krishna is building on that teaching, and someone who is truly able to understand the difference between the field and the knower of the field, to be able to distinguish that, they are stita pragya. And that's why Krishna explains that buddhi yoga is not different from Sankhya. The two are the same teaching. Now, I want to finish. Episodes to come, different speakers will focus on each of these verses individually and unpack them and go into those teachings in much greater depth. This is something of an overview, so you know what to expect in the episodes to come. But I want to share something about the nature of the self and the Supreme Self that really I have found in my own life has helped me cross over difficult times and um, help me navigate um, navigate misfortune, what we might call misfortune. So the self has 21 properties, attributes, and this is explained in Vedanta. So these various attributes of the self, they are incredible attributes and they're co-eternal with the self. In other words, the self is unchanging and eternal, and these attributes are eternal also. We don't have time to go into all of them, but some of them are, for example, self-luminous, Svayam Prakasha, self-luminous. The self doesn't require anything, any other light to illuminate it. So just like if I have a precious gem, to be able to see it, I need a light source to shine on it. But the self is not like that. The self shines by her own light. So for that reason, the self is Swayam Prakasha, self-luminous. The self also has cognition. The self is an agent. In other words, the self is able to act. The self has experiential awareness, many different attributes, 21 primary ones. Now, what's quite interesting, and this will help us understand this introduction to bhakti here, is that the very light of consciousness that we experience has the has Paramatma, the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Self, as its source. In other words, the source of our consciousness is the soul of the soul, the soul of the universe, Paramatma or Shri Krishna. There's so in developing this, there's one teacher named Sri Jiva Goswami. He asks, well, how is the self-luminous if the self is being illuminated by the Supreme Self? And he goes on to answer that question by explaining that the self and the Supreme Self are so closely connected that to say that even though the light of consciousness is the divine light of consciousness that emerges from the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Self, even so, the two are so closely connected, and we are entirely dependent on the Supreme Self for our very existence, that to say that it's still correct to say that the self is self-illuminating. So, in other words, all of the gifts and abilities and powers that we may have in our life, they actually belong to Sri Krishna, the Supreme Self. Even our very consciousness has the Supreme Lord as its source. We have no independent existence. Sri Krishna is the self of the self. And in order to be able to express the 21 properties that we have, like agency, ipsati, the sense of I, in order to be able to express our experiential awareness, our cognition, we're dependent on the powers of the Supreme Self. So these various powers, these gifts are not our own. So we're each born with a set of gifts, a set of talents, a set of abilities, and we might not always be, we might take many of them for granted even. So in intelligence, beauty, strength, friends and friendships, finances, all of the various talents that we might have, the various gifts that we've been given, even the unique personality that we have that allows us to express ourselves in this world and be of service in a unique way. All of those are dependent on the Supreme Self, Sri Krishna. And those particular gifts that we have, they are we have them on loan. So we can think of them as Shakti. Shaktis means powers or potencies. And Bhagavan, Sri Krishna, is the possessor of all potency, of all Shakti. And so these gifts are really there on loan. And we have them for a certain amount of time, and then they're withdrawn. And an awareness of that has really helped me in my own kind of personal journey and life experience, when you find that these powers, these various gifts kind of withdraw, then to remember that they don't belong to us in the first place. That has really helped me cross through difficult times. But also equally, when these particular powers manifest in our life, importantly, not to think in those times. So those times that we might call sukeshu, times of prosperity, times of uh, good times, so to speak. Also to know at those moments that these powers are not ours. So someone might praise us. We might do something that is, achieve something that's quite difficult. Someone might praise us, and we might, if we don't know better, we might take that seriously and think, yes, that's my power, that's my potency. But that also is an illusion and a mistake, and will inevitably lead to suffering. Or alternatively, when someone praises us, we might feel uncomfortable. We might deny our gifts in a kind of a display of false humility. But real humility is not falsely denying anything, but understanding that all power belongs to Bhagavan, the soul of the universe. And so you see here how someone who, when we begin in our, someone who's interested in bhakti yoga, if they um, if they understand that the various gifts that we have don't belong to us but belong to Sri Krishna. So when we have them, we use them. We use them as an offering to the Supreme Self. Then those very gifts become the vehicle by which we practice yoga. It's astonishing. They become the gifts by which we practice yoga. And if those gifts, if those powers are withdrawn from us, that becomes a testing ground to be able to see how we can navigate that, and to what extent we are stita pragya, to what extent we're firmly situated in wisdom. We'll stop here. Um, as I mentioned, speakers to come will unpack these different teachings.
I'm sorry, Simon, but we're not able to see you.
Oh,
Um,
I apologize. Has
ye-
this happened now?
yes, it's like just now. I can see something that says Elgato. It says please run camera hub to use Elgato virtual camera. I don't know, maybe it turned off.
My
We,
apologies. Let me see if I can fix that.
okay, that's okay. Yes, you're just back.
Sorry, apologies for that.
That's okay. No worries. No worries. That's okay. Okay, Simon. Well, thanks so much for this incredible class and for sharing this truly practical understanding of the philosophy, which is very deep. Usually, it's easier for us to understand it when it comes in the form of experiences or
Right.
stories than when it comes in the form of philosophy itself. And
Yeah.
well, of course, there are different types of intelligence and tastes, but we usually it's more difficult to understand when it's packed in this form of philosophy. And well, I think it's such a fascinating topic, and it's kind of the core of this part of the Bhagavad Gita.
Hmm.
This whole idea of understanding that it's not about what you do externally, but it's about your approach, how you approach to the situation from the inside, as you said. And when you were mentioning that, you wondered at a time that aren't desires what make life fun, you made me think of a question. Like it came to my mind. I can understand why we're told or encouraged to remain steady in difficult moments.
Mm.
But sometimes I think it's even more difficult to remain steady in happy moments. Like, it's
That's
difficult.
right.
I can't avoid sometimes feeling like, my God, I can't believe this is happening. And, I'm feeling so self satisfied. So, what to do in those moments? And first, what's the reason why we should also remain steady in those moments? Like, isn't that happiness what's also giving a kind of a purpose to our lives?
Right, right. Oh, that's a great question, Subhadra. Thank you. The two are two sides of the same coin. So if we are elated in kinds of in times of good fortune, it's guaranteed that we will feel dejected when whatever we're elated about disappears. So you can't actually have one without the other. we, we might, and you can test this for yourself. Any of us can test this in our own life. Um, if we feel if we feel elated and when things are going well in our life, we think things are going well in our life. So, in other words, when we gain our identity, we look for our identity and gain our identity from things in this world, and our identity, false identity, is strengthened by those things, and we feel a satisfaction from that. It becomes unavoidable to not also feel distress or suffering when that thing breaks down. So, for example, um, if we gain a sense of identity from status, for example, some kind of status, I don't know what that might be, whether some form of achievement, or you know, um, when that achievement is undermined in some way or we lose it, which inevitably happens, then we will also feel the other side of that experience. We'll feel dejection and a lot of suffering that comes from that. So the two things are these are two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. So it becomes important to find satisfaction, to find deep fulfillment in the self, not in the changing fortunes in this world. But I'm sure other speakers will unpack that, because that's something that Krishna mentions quite clearly in each of these, almost each of these verses that we've looked at.
Yes, it's a very deep topic, and thanks so much for your answer. But yes, I've heard also from my spiritual master this idea that you actually can't have one without the other, and it's with an analogy of about hunger. Like,
Oh, okay.
what is happiness? Like, is food happiness, or is hunger what makes you happy? Because if you weren't hungry, you wouldn't enjoy the food.
Right, right, right.
So what's actually what makes you feel that happiness? You need to be hungry first. So
Yeah,
if you're not hungry, you're actually gonna suffer. You're not gonna enjoy the food.
right, right.
That enjoyment comes from the feeling
Yeah.
of hunger.
I want to add also that these teachings of the Gita here on Stita Pragya, we shouldn't misunderstand them. So this is not a teaching about not being happy. This is a teaching about finding a much deeper happiness, a happiness that isn't that doesn't depend on events and outcomes in this world. That's the key point. If our happiness is dependent on events and outcomes, then it'll be a temporary happiness that will fade or that will be undermined at some point. And the other thing I think that is important about these verses for anyone who's perhaps encountering them for the first time is that the Stita Pragya verses are explaining the ideal. But it's not a conceptual ideal. It's an ideal that you can experience. This is actually what a yogi or yogini experiences. And you find teachings that are similar to this even in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. So this is important because when we're practicing yoga, various types of yoga, even if it's Hatha yoga or Patanjali's system of yoga, yoga is much more than just physical postures. The physical postures are very important. The pranayama, breathing, is very important, and other practices are very important. But the idea is that it takes us to this place, a place of being unperturbed, even in great challenges. But this sets the ideal, and I don't want to say that it's an easy thing to attain. So today, basically, we've focused on what is the ideal here, and Krishna will then will begin explaining to Arjuna what are ways of attaining that ideal. And Krishna will explain that actually the easiest way to attain it is through bhakti or devotion.
Well, thanks for clarifying, Simon. Yeah, so it's about learning and experiencing what true happiness is at the end. Well, thanks so much then for being here with us. I just want to share a comment from our dear Colleen, who's always with us in every session. Thanks for the lovely class. I always look forward to hearing the host questions, and also Sienna was joining us. Okay, I don't know if she's still here, but well, thanks so much.
Thank
To
you so much,
Simon.
Colleen.
Thanks, and Simon, thank you so much for sharing with us, and I'm looking forward to meeting you next Monday. I don't know, are you going to be next Monday with us?
I will, sure.
Okay, so let's meet next Monday then. Thanks so much, and see you then next time. And everyone, thank you so much for joining. I hope you enjoyed this session as much as I did. And I truly hope that everything that has been discussed is gonna help you in your own daily life, and that I'm sure you're gonna be able to apply it since it has been very practical. And of course, as always, I'd like to invite you to catch up our live sessions every Monday at 7:30 p.m. and Thursdays at 8 a.m. EST. And of course, follow us on Ashram Talks ENG at Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Ashram Talks English, not to miss any live episodes. And if you have any questions or any comments for the speakers, just don't hesitate to drop them here in the comment section or DM us on Instagram, and they will be more than happy to address all of your concerns. Have a great week, and see you then on Thursday. Goodbye.